Hello everybody, this is Donnie with Pvgna.com. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today's video is going to be about itemization. We're going to talk about item choices and what I've started calling an item tree. And we're going to talk about how to grow your own item tree, as it were, for whatever hero you might enjoy playing. And the hero that we're going to use for this example is Shadow Fiend. Shadow Fiend is the most popular hero in Dota 2 right now, not named Pudge. And we are going to talk about itemizing Shadow Fiend in different game scenarios and how that can be applied to other heroes and how to think about itemization in your games to fit the current scenario and win you more games through good itemization. So we're going to look at two games that were played by Untitled, who is one of the Pvgna pros on our site. He has guides on Shadow Fiend and Invoker and a sniper guide coming soon. But we're going to look at a couple of the Shadow Fiend games that he played in the FaceIT League recently, and we're just going to look at the itemization and the choices that he made in these games based off of the heroes that he's playing against and the items that they were building, and why these items make sense and how he likely approached the decision making around purchasing the items that he did. Okay, so we're going to try and look at these two games sort of in parallel so that we can compare the different decisions and where these item tree, as it were, branches off in different directions. So in game one, Shadow Fiend is facing a lineup of Dragon Knight middle, Terrorblade in the safe lane, Huskar in the off lane, Spirit Breaker accompanying the Huskar in the off lane, and then Shadow Shaman supporting the Terrorblade in the safe lane. Now this lineup, immediately we should make some sort of assumptions about what does Shadow Fiend need in this particular game. He's going to need some early stats because Spirit Breaker is going to be diving him mid on a regular basis. He's going to need, one thing that really sticks out about the Radiant team is that other than Spirit Breaker, this team has very, very low mobility. All of their move speeds are fairly mediocre or bad, and only Dragon Knight regularly builds a Blink Dagger early. Terrorblade, eventually gets Hurricane Pike, sometimes goes Blink. Same with Huskar, but just generally, these heroes are not going to be very mobile early on in the game. So let's look at what Shadow Fiend goes in this early game to solve those issues, and then we'll look at the second game. We look at Shadow Fiend's item progression in the early game. He starts out the same in both of these games, but then there is a small deviation in the early levels. In game one, Shadow Fiend goes Wand, he gets Boots, Raindrop, Wand, Bracer into Treads, and in game two, Shadow Fiend goes Boots, Wand, Aquila into Treads. Now, why this difference? Well, in game two, the lineup Shadow Fiend is facing is going to be OD in the middle lane, Bane, Gyrocopter, Puck, and Elder Titan. So, Bane is annoying in the mid lane. Bane is there to usually harass the mid laner and enfeeble them, but it's not the same thing as a Spirit Breaker who can dive under towers. Into the early part of the laning stage will be really applying pressure in Shadow Fiend's face. So this little Bracer build that Untitled goes on the Shadow Fiend is a nice little boost in stats early on that can save him potentially from a charge at like level 2 from Spirit Breaker or something like that. And then it also is a precursor for building Drums, which in game one, Drums is a very, very good item because we already talked about the low mobility of the Radiant team, and Drums is just generally really good on Shadow Fiend. In both games, he actually ends up going Drums, but that Bracer was just sort of a slight deviation that makes a lot of sense facing a team that's going to be diving you under tower in the very early levels. So after Drums in both games, Untitled goes for Blink Dagger in game one. And this is just another item that gives him a superior movement advantage over the other team, right? You're not going to have like a Huskar, a Terrorblade, Dragon Knight. They're not going to be able to catch the Shadow Fiend ever. He's going to be way too fast because he already has Drums and the active from Drums, and then he has a Blink Dagger, and those are his first two items. This allows Shadow Fiend to really kind of, number one, bounce around the map. He can pull the Spirit Breaker way too deep on a dive by blinking away at the last second. Despite there being a Spirit Breaker on the other team, he's going to be able to split push really well because he can quickly show up and then quickly get out, and the Blink Dagger allows him to, at the right moment, pop into the middle of the fight, pop his Requiem. It'll hit a lot of people because there's a lot of melee heroes and close range heroes on the Radiant team. So Blink Dagger is a really good item choice in this game. In game number 2, we'll see that he actually goes for Drums into Dragonlance. Now, why would Dragonlance be better in this game? And if we look at the lineup, we've got Bane, Gyrocopter, Elder Titan, OD, and Puck. And pretty much all of these heroes, you don't want to be going into the fight on any hero, and especially Shadow Fiend in this case. So in game 2, we can see this slight divergence on this item tree for Shadow Fiend, is that in game 1, he wants a lot of mobility, and he wants to be able to go into the fight at just the right time and split push. In game number 2, he wants to sort of be more of like this backline damage dealer, right? He has a DK who can be up front and tanking for them. He also is going to eventually go into a Hurricane Pike as his mobility item, as we can see. And this makes a lot of sense because you simply just don't want to jump into a Gyrocopter, an Elder Titan, a Puck Coil, or, you know, you don't want to really be close to OD either. You want to be sort of on the edge of the fight, dealing a lot of damage with your right clicks, and avoiding as many spells as possible. So before we get on to the next items, I just want to briefly talk about Shadow Fiend as a hero, and what the hero lacks, and why itemization makes sense on this hero the way that it does. Shadow Fiend is basically just a giant ball of damage. He does a lot of right-click damage, he does a lot of magic damage, he does a lot of AoE damage, but other than that, the hero doesn't have a lot else going for him, right? He's a fairly slow-moving hero without items. He's not overly tanky. He gets fairly tanky in the late game, but that's usually because of the itemization. Basically, all he really brings to the game without items is just a lot of damage. So that's why going items like drums, which doesn't give him a lot of damage but gives him health, mana, and movement, is good. That's why going Blink Dagger, Dragon Lance, Hurricane Pike, these are all good items on Shadow Fiend because they fulfill the need for mana and for movement, which are two things that Shadow Fiend severely lacks in his regular kit and his talents. So we can see that in both games, iAnnihilate goes for BKB and Butterfly next as his next two items, in that order. BKB makes a lot of sense in game number 1, simply because he has the Blink Dagger. He's going to be jumping into fights and using his Requiem at the right time to negate a lot of damage and blow up Terrorblade illusions and that sort of thing, and he doesn't want that canceled by a Shadow Shaman Hex or Shackle, by a Dragon Knight Stun. Huskar does a lot of damage through Life Break, and just generally BKB is a great pairing with Blink on Shadow Fiend because it allows you to guarantee a Requiem most of the time. Yes, Radiant Team can cancel it with a Spirit Breaker ultimate, but generally speaking, the BKB Requiem is fairly reliable when you have that combo. Butterfly makes sense in game 1 because Terrorblade is basically only right-click damage. Huskar is a lot of right-click damage. The Dragon Knight will become fairly right-click heavy. Even the bashes, which are one of the only things that can stop Shadow Fiend from doing stuff when he's BKB'd, are also right-click. The wards are also right-click from Shadow Shaman, so Butterfly makes a lot of sense in this game because it will give him evasion against a ton of damage. It also further extends his advantage of movement because of Flutter and just the agility, and it makes Shadow Fiend right-click much harder as well. So all around, Butterfly is a great item on Shadow Fiend. In this particular game, it's a fantastic item because of how effective it is at negating damage to Shadow Fiend. In game number 2, we have Butterfly being very useful again because it also negates a lot of damage from heroes like OD and Gyrocopter. So that utility is really nice. However, it's also one of the most efficient damage items for Shadow Fiend because he gets a ton of right-click damage from his souls, and the faster he attacks, the better that is for him. And in this game, there isn't a whole lot of right-click damage on his team besides Shadow Fiend. And that's exactly what he needs in this game because his team doesn't have a whole lot of right-click damage other than him, and his first 3 items were all pretty defensive. Drums, Hurricane Pike, and BKB all provide decent stats, good health, some defensive capabilities, but not a whole lot of right-click or just damage in general. And then obviously the BKB purchased before the Butterfly in game 2 makes a lot of sense because most of the damage from Team Dire, at least in the mid and even early stages of the late game, is going to be magic in the form of Puck and OD, Elder Titan, Bane, and Gyrocopter. So you can see that despite having the same items, they were probably purchased for slightly different reasons. And that's kind of an important thing to notice because as you are building an item tree, as you are figuring out what items to buy and which direction to go, defensive, offensive, utility, you should really be thinking about why am I buying this? And if you know why, as opposed to just, oh, this is a good item on this hero, or the guide is telling me to buy this item, then you actually really start thinking about the game itself and what's happening in this game and why things make sense in the way that they do. Looking at the next few items that he buys, a Lincoln Sphere and a Hex. Both of these items are actually really good on Shadow Fiend. The Lincoln Sphere in this particular game is fantastic because it will basically guarantee that he gets his BKB off, because, you know, even if he is not pre-BKBing to blink into a fight, the Lincoln Sphere popping will allow him just a quarter of a second to pop the BKB. It'll also let him split push really effectively because it'll block the charge from Sphere Breaker, which is basically the only way that Radiant team can catch him. And it gives him more stats, which he needs, and mana regeneration and health regeneration as well, which is super nice, so he can stay out on the map, pressuring lanes as much as possible and making this slow-moving Radiant team go from one side of the map to the other. The Hex also makes a lot of sense in this game because his team is fairly low on disables. They have Batrider Lasso, they have the Carry Naga Net, they have the Necrophos Ultimate, and then they have Disruptor's Kinetic Field. None of these are all that reliable aside from Lasso, and I mean, the net is decent, but having a Hex is just a little bit of extra control that's really nice when you're playing against a hero like Terrorblade, who has this, he needs to get Sundered off, and if you can Hex him down and burst him, then it completely destroys that hero. It's also really good against Huskar. You know, when Huskar is going crazy on low health and pumping out tons of damage, you can just Hex him and kill him, and he can't do anything about it. So Hex is a fantastic choice. Again, it's more stats, which is really good because he's kind of playing, you know, this split pushing. He's really the tower hitter. I mean, the Naga illusions, the Naga can kind of do it, but he's really the tower hitter. The Hex gives him the control, gives him lots more mana regeneration, so he can spam his spells as much as possible, and it gives him some solo kill potential as well because he can lock down heroes. Now in game 2, we see that he goes for a Bloodthorn. Now why would he go Bloodthorn in this game? Well, we've already discussed that the Butterfly pickup is not really to negate a ton of damage. It's good against OD in that sense, but it's really to do more damage. And so the Bloodthorn is just a continuation of that. Bloodthorn allows him to do a ton more damage with the crit. It gives him the mana regeneration that he needs to be able to spam his spells because he doesn't really have any other mana regeneration at this point. And active is obviously really good against basically all of the heroes on the other team. So let's also consider just the picture of the game, the play style that the team wants to play in each game as well when considering itemization. In game 1, the Dire team doesn't really want to be fighting the Radiant team head on. Fighting into a Terrorblade and a Dragon Knight with lots of control and Serpent Wards and all sorts of stuff like that just doesn't really seem like a very successful prospect, especially when you can abuse their mobility and use your superior pickoff skills to kind of pick them apart and pull them across the map and separate them and then break them apart. In game 2, the enemy team has significantly better split push and D-push than in game 1, and so that sort of split pushing playstyle isn't as viable. They also have much better catch for the Shadow Fiend, and so basically at some point Shadow Fiend is going to just have to fight them. Gyrocopter and OD are strong heroes, they do a lot of damage, but once you have a BKB, and if you are equal or higher farm than them, which Shadow Fiend usually is because he farms faster, then Shadow Fiend becomes really a right-click carry and can deal with both Gyrocopter and OD pretty well as long as Shadow Fiend has a BKB. So in this sense, Shadow Fiend knows that he's going to kind of have to be like the big right-click damage dealer and itemizes accordingly so that they can fight behind the Dragon Knight and with the Batrider for pickoffs, whereas in game 1, Shadow Fiend was much more likely to be hopping around the map, showing up for fights, getting pickoffs, letting his team get pickoffs while he was split pushing, and then just generally outmaneuvering the other team. So I hope that you learned something from this. I hope that you can kind of see how these like item choices are made and how you have sort of like a core item set, but then you can branch off in different directions depending on the specific game. And you can really apply this to any hero that you're playing. You should really be asking yourself, okay, what weakness do I need to solve in this particular game for myself, for my team? What are specific things that I need in this game? Do I need to be tanky, or do I need more mana regeneration? Do I need catch? Do I need survivability? These are things that you need to just constantly ask yourself, and you can adjust your item builds based on the answers to those questions. And when you're building these items, you know, it's great to build up to the items with all the small little components in the order that you need them. As we saw in the first game, getting that early bracer was good to survive against Spirit Breaker diving, and eventually turns into a drums. Likewise, that's why a lot of people will get the Ring of Health early when they're going going for a Battle Fury as a carry in lane because it helps sustain them once their tangos and salve have been used. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was informative. I hope this helps you sort of figure out itemization a little bit better. I do want to also quickly just let you know that we have an in-game Shadow Fiend guide. I will link it in the description below. You can subscribe to it in-game. It will have all of the items and the relevant ones that you would probably ever need to buy on Shadow Fiend in all different scenarios in that shop, so you don't have to search for items in the shop. They're all just right there. So if you would like to, subscribe to that, upvote it if you like it, and just let us know how we can improve our in-game guides. I hope that it wins you some games. So thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Good luck and have fun.